like to start, since this is set in France, Consul General, I'd like to start with you. One of the points that was, one of the things I thought was interesting about the movie is it came across that the people at Suis Charlie, at Charlie Hebdo, they're crude, they're childish, they're completely convinced that they're right about everything, which means that they're absolutely perfect examples of journalists. What I'm wondering is, are they France? How much do they represent France?
How far they are representing France, difficult to say. First, I could say that it's an old tradition. Cartoonists caricatures are an old tradition in France, going back to the 18th century, 19th century. It's part of the freedom of speech, of thought and speech. I guess the 4 million of French who took on the streets after the different attacks on the 7th, on the 8th, on the 9th, against the journalists, against the policemen, against the Jewish community. I guess a few of them before had bought and read the Charlie Hebdo. Very few knew of it. I guess some other newspapers like the Canard Enchaîné, what they talked before, is more well known. But it's a kind of French spirit that Charlie Hebdo represents. It's very strong. Their caricature shocked and still shock a lot of people, but that's the freedom of speech. You are not obliged to appreciate the caricature, you're not obliged to buy the newspaper. That's all. But I think that they represent the French spirit against institution, against religion. I should add that the main target of Charlie Hebdo was and is the Catholic Church, not the Jewish community or Muslims. The main target is the Catholic Church because it has always been for 2 centuries. It's a fight between the Church and the society to divide. That's perhaps it's difficult here to understand what laicity mean for France and for French people. We had a state religion for centuries during the monarchy, and we get rid of it during the revolution. After the monarchy came back and the empire, but it has always been a fight between the state religion, the Catholic Church, and the society. And I think they represent such trend and maybe not a fight, but still some difference of.
Well, let me follow up on something. As you point out, Charlie Hebdo attacks the Catholic Church. They've made fun of Jews. They've made fun of pretty much everybody. Professor, could you try and help us understand why the depictions of Muhammad caused such anger, whereas people they might get annoyed at the Catholic Church being picked on, but they kind of shrug it off or just kind of move on?
First, I'd like to say thank you to yourself and to the organizers for allowing me to be here this evening and inviting me, and it's an extreme honor to be on this panel with 2 distinguished guests. I think that the quick answer to that question, many people would want to say that there's something different about Muslim culture or about Islamic values than, let's say, Western values that would compel Muslims to be extremely upset about such a situation and then lead to acts of violence. I think that the public logic has gotten us there, and that's sort of the off-the-cuff sort of explanation. But I think where the Consul General left off is where we should start with our explanation, and that is that the French tradition of laïcité has had a long and deep antagonistic relationship with religion in the public square that is well understood within Western cultures. Okay, and it's actually deeper and something much more antagonistic than anything that we're used to or accustomed to here in the United States. Okay, and so the context for discussing Islam in France is not a part of an attack on religion. Now, maybe the cartoonists themselves and maybe some segments of French society choose to view it in that lens, but the context for depictions of Muhammad are about Arab integration into France and colonial history in France. And so that is a much different kind of relationship about what French society is. It is not about religion and its role in French society. It is about Arabs and Muslims in French society. And that is a radically different conversation that is much more akin to race relations here in the United States than it is anything to do with the place of religion and freedom of speech. So I think from the perspective of an anthropologist completely outside of the framework of French politics, I think that this is where I began the inquiry into why the dynamics differ.
Mr. Isaacson, how good a job has France done at trying to integrate the other, as we talked about a little bit earlier today, and make the other, whether it's North Africans or Arabs or Roma or anyone else, part of both France and about European values?
Well, thanks for the question, and again, thanks for putting me on this panel with, again, distinguished panelists. It is with some trepidation that I would even approach this question with the Consul General of France sitting next to me. So you're putting me in a very funny place, Mike. But I think
it's supposed to be a funny newspaper. So
there you go. It's been a mixed record, I think it's fair to say, and I think it's not only France, but yes, you asked about France. I was in Paris actually just before this latest attack in November at the concert hall and stadium and bar, and it was clear that there were people on the streets who weren't just Syrian refugees, but were also Roma, as we discussed earlier today. But I think the whole history of European integration of the other, of the stranger, of someone different, is a very spotty record. And if we are going to make any kind of serious effort to absorb the new migrants who have come because of the catastrophe in Syria and because of what's happened in Afghanistan and in Iraq and the breakdown of civil order in parts of Africa and all of the people who are flooding now into Europe, we are going to have to figure out how it is that one can integrate populations of people who are the other in ways that have never been approached. And that means not only providing for education systems that teach European values, working with religious authorities, working with leaders in these migrant communities, those who have come before and those who are arriving now, providing jobs. It's such a massive undertaking, and Europe, I think, for decades has just drifted along and allowed for the creation of poorly integrated, alienated suburbs around major cities, massive discrimination, persecution, isolation, alienation, joblessness, a terrible cycle. And it's so many different actors that need to play a part. It's not just government. It also requires leadership in these communities, which are slow to emerge but have to emerge.
Professor, one thing I was thinking about when watching this movie is that Islam is maybe 2,000 years younger than Judaism, and maybe 600 years younger than Christianity. And Christianity was about 100 years older than Islam is now when it went through the Reformation. Martin Luther posted those complaints in Worms. I'm wondering, particularly in light of Professor Zatani's comments about the need for brave Muslims. Is Islam at a place where a reformation is coming, should be coming, and if one comes, can it happen without 200 years of violence like we saw when Christianity went through its reformation?
A number of scholars believe that that's something that's unfolding right now in the world, but the truth of the matter is that the overwhelming majority of the Muslim world subscribes to Sunni Islam, and just the very structures of thinking about a reformation in that context just doesn't lend itself to it that way. It would be like saying, can we have a reformation of the Baptist Church? It doesn't work. It's like, can we have a reformation of Protestantism? It doesn't work because of the structures of the religion and the structures of the churches. There's no Vaticanness within Sunni Islam. And again, I don't think that the issue is really one fundamentally about religious doctrine. Far more complex. And as a religious studies professor, we're always trying to get our students to understand that there are multiple layers of context that drive these sorts of conversations. I think one of the problems with the depiction of the issue being about civilization, being about values, being about religion, is that we always see a binary emerge within representations of the problem. We have the brave Muslims, the Muslims that will defend even our own language and dignity, like the fellow that they mentioned at the end, Mustafa, and those are us, right? And we have this other thing that is a radical, inapproachable monster. And there is nothing in between those two. And there is no depth whatsoever to Muslim society in its representation in Europe, at moments of polarization like this, in the United States. There is simply this evil other. And I don't think that we do that for just about any other community that's out there. We understand that we can have conservative, really, conservative Christians that we don't want to be like. Okay, I think the Jewish community in particular understands its own range of differences, right? But we understand that there's a line between the most conservative, retrograde sort of religious extremists and violent extremists, right? And we understand there's a level of tolerance in place for all values and opinions, even those that we disagree with. So the question is, how is it that we choose to frame this conversation? At every moment we have a choice. Film directors have choices. Academics, scholars, journalists have choices in the way that they depict this problem. And that frame of a binary between either us or evil is not going to get us anywhere in the conversation.
Consul General, one of the cartoons that Charlie Hebdo has been criticized for since the time of these attacks was a cartoon depicting the refugee child that sort of got the whole world worked up. And the purpose of the cartoon was to show that Europe's attitude toward the refugees was wrong and really racist. And yet they took lots of criticism just for making a depiction of that child. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what is the attitude in general in France toward Charlie Hebdo these days compared with January 11th last year? Where is it now?
I live here in Atlanta, so it's difficult to understand well what feelings the French people living in France have towards Charlie Hebdo.
Well,
I know that there were strong reactions against this particular caricature.
Have your attitudes toward the magazine changed?
Sorry?
Have your feelings about the magazine changed since January 11th?
I know that some other cartoonists have left the Charlie Hebdo. Some tensions inside the editorial staff, and that caricature was very perceived badly because it was perceived as fueling some themes, some trends represented by the far right against immigrants, against the openness of the French society. That's why it was very badly perceived and a lot of newspapers have criticized Charlie Hebdo.
Could all three of you speak about anti-Semitism in France and the incident that followed was anti-Semitism, and how there's such a large amount of people leaving France, Jews leaving France?
Jason, if you could just take that, I think maybe your best position to
And maybe I can recover some of the lost ground that I have made with my fellow panelist here. I apologize, Consul General. No, in fact, I'd say that the French government has taken extraordinary steps to address anti-Semitism. Prime Minister Valls introduced a very comprehensive action plan against anti-Semitism. I'm privileged to say that AJC played a role, at least, in providing some advice. I know we weren't the only ones to the French government. There's an interministerial official in the French government who works very aggressively to bring together all the different departments within the government, to work on security, to work on internet issues, to work on prison issues, to work on education issues. There are so many aspects of combating violent anti-Semitism that the French have been tackling. It's a huge task. And clearly there are French Jews who are very worried. And clearly the numbers who have decided to move to Israel, who have made Aliyah, has risen. It's not a gushing river of exodus, but there has been a significant increase, and that's of great concern. But there is ongoing consultation between the French government and French Jews, French Jewish leadership, and there have been very serious steps taken, including, of course, the stationing of police and soldiers outside Jewish institutions, which is a massive undertaking and at some great expense to the government of France.
All right, well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your insights. Thank you, everybody, for hanging around and listening to it. And